Good evening and welcome to Nantucket Community Television's 2020 election coverage, coming to you live for the next 25 or 30 minutes. I'm Charlie Walters. I'm joined tonight by two panelists, Toby Brown, who is a member of the Republican Town Committee here on Nantucket, and also Parker Richards, who's a Democratic he is a Nantucket journalist who is reporting on the Democratic Party. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you very much.
Let me tell you what we're going to do over the next 25 or 30 minutes. We are going to announce the results. That'll be the first thing I do. That's going to come up in about 30 seconds or so. After that, there will be a discussion among the three of us, and we'll be discussing only the four contested races. The three uncontested races and the two ballot questions we will announce, but we will not have discussion about them. Also, later on in the program, and we'll give you notice on that, there will be two Zoom chats, one about the Senate and House race, or races, and one about the presidential race. And the public, of course, will be able to communicate with us via Zoom chat. And as I said, we will tell you how to do that shortly. And again, if you're one of the viewers from the public, if you are sending in comments or questions, please restrict them to those four contested races. And let's go with the official Nantucket results. I say official advisedly because the results came from the town clerk, Nancy Holmes, and the official results will be out sometime next week. So technically these are unofficial, but these are about as close as they can be to being the official in capital letters results. I'm going to read these in the order opposite from the order on the ballot, if you're wondering how I decided how to do things. So I'm starting with ballot question number 2. That is about ranked voting in the Commonwealth. Yes, 3,664, no, 3,006. So the yes votes take it by about 10%. Ballot question number 1. This is the so-called right to repair regarding automobiles in Nantucket. And that question came up yes, 4,918, and no was 1,896. And I'm told that the way I'm reading them out is not the same as the graphics. We somehow got tripped up there. So I think what I will do is I will start at what would have been the end and do it that. And I'm getting another note here saying that question 2 was rejected. So I got those numbers backwards. Take 2. No was 3,664 and yes was 3,006. Okay. Let me jump to what would have been the end of the list. Well, it's the beginning of the list on the ballot. Joe Biden, 5,230. The U.S. House of Representatives. The incumbent Democrat, Bill Keating, 5,129 votes, and the Republican challenger, Helen Brady, 1,862. U.S. Senate. Incumbent Senator Ed Markey, 5,127, and the challenger on the Republican side, Kevin O'Connor, 2,030. Now, the next 3, the state representative, Dylan Fernandez, the incumbent state senator, the incumbent Julian Sear, both Democrats, and the 1st district councilor, Joseph Ferreira, another Democrat, they all ran unopposed. So they're in. And the Register of Probate for Nantucket County, that's actually a state office, but we're voting on it on Nantucket. Sarah Maxwell, 5,484. Barbara Mendez, 16. Okay, that is all 7 ballot races and all 7 contested and uncontested races and the 2 ballot questions. Parker and Toby, I'm going to start with you, Toby. Any comments about the Register of Probate? There was not a Republican on there. Barbara Mendez was an independent candidate. Sarah Maxwell, a Democrat.
I don't know a lot about the Register of Probate, the office itself, but Sarah really, was campaigning probably a good couple months ago, even in the primaries when she was unopposed. She's very nice. A lot of people know her, and just a really nice person. Once again, don't really know what the Register of Probate does, but I know I voted for her, and she would have been the only Democrat I voted for on the ballot, and I think that was it. She already works in that office, and she's just a really a good person, and she really worked hard. She was at the Rotary many a days holding signs, and she had a good support group.
Parker, what about you?
Well, I think that it's the sort of kind of under the radar office that ends up being very important. It's where you go if you have anything to do with a will, if you're collecting an inheritance, if you're getting married or divorced or changing your name. Like, this is one of those offices that we all will probably have to deal with in life, and that we all basically don't think about unless we do have to deal with it, is I think more or less the state of it. And so it's a very important office, and I think that Sarah Maxwell essentially was able to capitalize, as Toby was saying, on her experience working in that office already. And really, that's kind of the end all be all here. This is someone who island voters knew to have experience with the role, and they know it's a, kind of nuts and bolts role that helps make the community's government run more smoothly. And, if all goes well, it's the sort of role that you elect someone to and then don't really hear a ton about it in the future. And that's a good thing.
We're now going to go to our first video. The topic of this is talking about voting during a pandemic. This is about 3 minutes long, and we'll be back live after those 3 minutes.
It's an American right, man. The military gave their lives for us, and I think it's our duty to represent our country the best we can from anywhere.
People should vote because it's our civic duty, and it's the way that we participate in democracy.
It's fundamentally what our democracy depends on in order for self-government.
Because it's our constitutional right. It's the way that our democracy runs.
Well, for young people, I think it's a good experience, and it exposes them to the political stage and what goes on in the government, and at least it did for me. Yeah, this is my first time voting.
Why should people vote? A lot of people sacrificed a lot for the right to vote.
And that's why you should come out to vote, to keep this country free and respect the American flag and all the military, thousands that have died already keeping it that way.
Well, we're all required to, or it's our legal right to be able to vote, but to come out in a pandemic, we're out anyways, shopping, doing what we have to, being with the mask and everything, we're protected from what they tell us.
I thought it was important to set a good example and to not be so fearful of everything that we hear. Everything in the high school was completely safe. People are wearing masks, as I am. People are socially distanced. With the amount of people who voted in advance, this felt perfectly normal and safe.
I know there's something about voting on election day, and it's just always the way I've done it, and I trusted that it would be social distancing and everybody had a mask on, and I like to vote in person on election day.
Because I did not trust the other systems. I wanted to make sure that I was able to hand my ballot in and that it went through properly.
Because it felt good to actually scratch the mark in, and I didn't. I forgot to do the absentee.
Well, actually, I simply didn't get my mail-in ballot application in on time.
I don't know. I mean, I wanted to see if there was anybody I knew at the local precinct.
Because it's important to do my part for the country.
We are back live, and now we're going to invite our panelists into the discussion, and we're going to talk about the Senate race to begin with. Parker, I'll begin with you this time.
Thanks. I mean, frankly, this was kind of a known factor, I think, going into the race. Markey won. His competition was the primary, where actually I think a lot of people thought that he might lose in Nantucket, but he did end up winning here, and as well as beating Congressman Kennedy statewide. I noticed that Kevin O'Connor ran actually a bit ahead of President Trump in the island's vote, which makes me think that there are some Republican voters who were supporting Mr. O'Connor but couldn't quite make themselves support Mr. Trump for whatever reason. And that was quite interesting to me in these results. At the end of the day, Markey's re-election statewide has been pretty much assured since he won the primary, and I don't think I'm too surprised by what ended up happening there.
Toby, what about you?
Yeah, not a big surprise there. It's, you know, we're in very deep blue territory. O'Connor was not my kind of favorite type of candidate, to be honest with you. Some of the things he said, I thought he was very aligned with kind of Charlie Baker type, which I'm not a big fan of. But yeah, it's not a shock, but I actually thought he might have got less votes than what the Trump people did, because I thought he was just more of the establishment type of guy, where Trump's not.
Before we talk about, before we talk about the House, I want to tell the viewers at home how they can join the Zoom chat, which will be coming on in a few minutes. If you go to the YouTube description of this show, you can get onto Zoom chat and you can type in whatever question or comment you want to make. I would ask you only to restrict it to either the House race or the Senate race. Now we'll get back to the commentary from our panelists. And Parker, I'll start with you again. The U.S. House race in our district, the 9th Congressional District in Massachusetts.
Yeah, well, Congressman Keating first won in the Republican wave year in 2010, and since then he's kind of cruised to re-election, and I don't think he's ever even come close to losing Nantucket, but I do think this might have been his best showing on the island. And at some level, that's not surprising. He's kind of a under-the-radar guy in the House, and I think that he's been able to essentially come across as a good district representative for the island and for the communities that he represents generally. And he's one of those people who seems like he'll probably end up holding this seat until he chooses to retire at this point. And that's despite it being the most competitive seat in Massachusetts. So I wasn't surprised to see him also winning quite solidly. And notably, I think his opponent, Helen Brady, ended up with the fewest votes of any of the Republican candidates this year, and ended up actually Congressman Keating ended up actually almost exactly even with the Biden-Harris ticket, and doing a couple votes better than Senator Markey. So probably a good night for him, all things considered with that. And he's outperforming the partisan lean of the district by a fair bit district-wide.
If you are a viewer trying to join the chat, I need to point out that if you are using the YouTube link, you need to refresh the link. You need to refresh the pages to find the link, is what I should be saying. So keeping that in mind, we hope to hear from you. As we're waiting, I just want to point out a couple of things about these races. Bill Keating. We are in the 9th district, but when he was first elected to Congress back in 2010, it was to the 10th district, which no longer exists. But there was redistricting because Massachusetts' population has not been keeping up with the rest of the United States, or much of the rest of the United States. And the 10th district was eliminated. And as a result of that redistricting, Bill Keating ended up, to make a long story short, as the representative of the 9th Congressional District, and he's been reelected every time ever since. And we are still waiting here, so let me throw in something else here. As we all know, Nantucket is part of a state that has an entirely Democrat representation in Washington. All 9 congressmen are Democrats, both senators are Democrats. And yet we have a Republican governor who in one poll not long ago was the most popular governor in the United States. So how does this happen? Well, in a couple of ways. Charlie Baker is a moderate, some would say a liberal Republican. But beyond that, Massachusetts, while it's been predominantly Democrat for generations, when it comes to the governor's office, that's not always the case. This is not an aberration that Charlie Baker, a Republican, is the governor. If you go back to the end of World War II, since 1945, there have been 11 Republican governors and only 8 Democrat governors. I don't know if any other state can display that same contrast, but that, if you think Baker is an aberration, it really is not in terms of being a Republican. Parker, anything you want to say while we're waiting for questions?
I don't think Toby weighed in on the House race yet, if he wanted to first.
Toby, why don't you go ahead? I apologize.
Yeah, Parker broke up, but I think you're talking about Helen Brady. Was that what you mentioned, Parker?
Did you comment? Did you comment on the House?
No, I didn't comment on the House.
My apologies.
Oh, no problem. Yeah.
Now's your chance.
So the opposite of how I felt with Brady versus O'Connor. I actually like Brady. She came over to the island. I drove her around. She met with some of us tradesmen and women, and she was very not like the governor. She was for Trump, not this whole let's lock everybody down like our governor is doing that right now. She actually had coronavirus, and I actually just expected her to at least match what Trump got. But once again, who knows? Not everybody's like my thinking, I guess.
Well, she appeared, actually all the congressional candidates appeared on Channel 18 in individual interviews. So if people didn't catch that, they can catch it on YouTube. Helen Brady, go ahead.
I was going to say, Charlie, just going off of your comment a minute ago about Charlie Baker not being an aberration. I wrote for The Atlantic a couple of years ago when Baker was running for re-election in the midterms about how he and Governor Phil Scott in Vermont really embody a tradition in New England politics that's declining but far from dead, where you have these moderate to even somewhat liberal Republican governors who can really break the state's respective political trends. And, Charlie Baker, of course, isn't on the ballot tonight. He's got another 2 years left in his term. But Phil Scott up in Vermont is winning with almost 70% of the vote. And like Baker, he's someone who's distanced himself from President Trump and has responded aggressively to coronavirus concerns. And I think that there is a path still in New England, even in very, very blue states, for some of these guys who don't necessarily look like what the National Republican Party looks like. And, that I think, as Toby has said, doesn't always work for some of their own voters here, some of the people in these states in the Republican parties, but it does seem to attract crossover votes from Democrats and independents who otherwise are not voting for Republicans.
Okay, we're going to move on to our second and final video. This again was done today with Nantucket voters, and the question was, what is most important to voters?
The most important issue that I feel that we are facing today is divisiveness of our country is wrong, and everyone that's fighting against each other will never accomplish anything.
I think the main issue that I feel this election year is that we need to return some sense of respect and decency and kindness to our elected government.
Just making sure everyone's squared away. It doesn't matter about color, doesn't matter about financial status. This is America, man. We should all be squared away.
I want calm. I I want kindness. Return to the American ways that we all grew up with.
Well, the pandemic is definitely a defining issue for me. I suspect that whatever risk we're taking, which is not the same as what a lot of first-line workers take, is worth taking just so we can make sure we have the right person in the office.
I want climate change addressed and health care and the systemic racism that we have in our country. I want to address all of these issues, and that's why I think it's important.
I came out to vote because I cannot see people taking the police departments and making them smaller and having more riots. All these Democratic states that are going bankrupt and want the American people to bail their states out is ridiculous.
The issues. Where do we start?
I don't have any real particular issues at this point, just that everybody stays safe and healthy.
We need to come together, become cohesive, and fight the evils as one. Because together we are strong, but apart we are nothing.
We are back live here at 2020 election coverage for Nantucket Community Television. And Toby, I'm going to start with you this time. Give us your thoughts on the results on Nantucket of the presidential race. And just to refresh both of you, Joe Biden got 5,234 votes, 71.4% of the total. And Donald Trump got 1,912 or 26.1% of the total. Take it away, Toby.
So once again, not a shock that Trump lost Nantucket. However, we've been doing rallies for the last 4 weekends leading up to the election. We've had a good amount of people for Nantucket, once again, probably 15, 20 of us. And we've had a real good response from many people. I was kind of hoping for better numbers, but was not disappointed by the positive response we got by a lot of pretty much from everywhere. And it was nice to see. We also had a lot of not so good responses from the Biden-Harris people. But I was very happy that our very first rally, I thought, within 10 minutes, we'd be all just kind of shut, thrown out and get out of here. But we had 4 in a row and we stayed for 2 hours each, and it was very positive. So that was a good thing, but I guess not once again, still not enough, but it was a positive thing.
Sticking with you for just a moment, Toby. The turnout on Nantucket was 76% this year, and I believe it was 73% in 2016 when it was Trump against Clinton. It surprised me that the turnout didn't jump more than it did. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I heard numbers about a couple of days ago that early voting was 5,000 people, and we got 9,600 people voting. I really thought we'd be 90%. I'm really shocked, and that probably, once again, even the high, but 76 for Nantucket. God, I think some of our select person elections we're lucky to have 1,000 people sometimes. So it was very good to see the turnout. And once again, I think the big turnout was probably the ones that really didn't like Trump. But I also think there was a lot of other turnout. But yeah, I really thought we'd be 90% after 5,000 early voters. Yeah.
And before I go to Parker, I'm just reminding people that they can join the chat or start a chat via YouTube if they have any comments or questions about the presidential part of the ballot today. Parker, about turnout, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I would expect it to be a little higher, but I think it's also worth noting that Nantucket's kind of at least in presidential races, obviously not in local races, as Toby's correctly pointing out, is a fairly high turnout community to begin with. So I think that's part of it. I also think that with the island's rising coronavirus cases, there were probably some voters who had delayed and waited for election day, and then at the end of it kind of went, okay, Massachusetts isn't competitive, none of these races are really that competitive, do I want to take this risk, and said no. And that's unfortunate, but it's not surprising. I did vote today in person, and it felt like there were just very few people there at the polling place, so it wouldn't surprise me if the vast majority of that turnout was early. Yeah, that would be more or less my take.
Before you go on, just a reminder to people, it's Zoom chat if you want to join the conversation. That is, the link, however, is in the YouTube description. I know this is a lot to remember to do, but I'm assuming most people are more conversant with these sorts of things than I am. But we're hoping to hear from you. Parker, were you finished? I interrupted you, I think.
No worries. Just more generally, outside of turnout, something that I'm very curious about is that we've seen nationally President Trump is doing substantially better with Hispanic voters than he has in the past, and it's something that the Biden campaign, I think, wasn't fully expecting. And that voting bloc is probably why he'll win Florida. It might be why he's holding Texas, and it's why he's competitive in Nevada. And something that I'm curious about, and something we're unlikely to see data on, but something I would very much like to see data on, is if that trend is consistent with the Hispanic community here on Nantucket, which is growing and which I think is making itself felt more electorally. And it's I think a big question here is that group going to end up being both nationally and locally more conservative in the future?
One thing that caught my eye about the results this year compared to 2016 is that while the turnout was up, as I just said, but also Nantucket is a larger place. There are more people living here than there were 4 years ago. And I'm not sure whether the increase in turnout is commensurate with the increase in the number of people who are actually living here now.
Turnout is calculated, I think, off of registered voters. So the number of people living here might have gone up, but the turnout numbers would either way be off of the registered voters. So it would be commensurate with any increase in the registration numbers, I think.
And it's also, I mean, since we're talking about this sort of thing, it's always been a mystery to me how you can get a really accurate figure anyway, because as long as I've been living here, which is since 1971, there's always been a contingent of people who will work here as house painters or whatever it happens to be from April or May until Columbus Day weekend or Thanksgiving or whatever. So you get people who might be on Nantucket for, let's say, 6 months and 1 day or more than that. So they're living here more than they're living any other place, but are they residents or not? And I know that question opens up a whole can of worms. There are a lot of retired people who are here for 6 months and a day, and yet they claim Florida or whatever as a place of residence. But it's one of those things that in a transient community, in a tourist community, you've got the guy who paints houses all summer and skis in Vail all winter. Is he a Vail resident or is he a Nantucket resident? And what should he be and what should he not be? For another session for sure. Toby, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up with Parker's comment on the Latino vote. That was one thing we noticed at our rallies. There was actually a lot of Latino, Hispanics, and other immigrants, Eastern European, that really were giving us a lot of support. And I think a lot of the things with the Latinos, like I have, a lot of good friends that, they came here because they love America. And, it's funny, a lot of people think, well, wow, and a lot of people that aren't allowed to come to America were actually, criminals. And these are coming from the Latinos. I don't want to get into this, and that's what friends of mine will say is that, we got here because our records are clean. And I've talked to many, even Canadians have to have squeaky clean records to get into this country. And I just think that, I think that we want everybody. And I think they also want to make sure that wherever we're from, that we're, we know we're not letting criminals in, and I think that might be why there is a lot of support in the, Hispanic population.
We do have a question. I'll ask both of you to give short answers to the question, and I'll read it out as it was sent to us. How do you think the presidential votes might be different if the full summer population had been able to cast their ballots for the president on Nantucket. A big hypothetical, but what can you tell us, Parker?
It's really hard to say. I think that you'd probably have a lot of seasonal workers who, maybe they'd lean slightly Democrat. There's a lot of college students who come to work here in the summer, but I could also see some of those workers, like some of the folks that Toby was just talking about, leaning Republican. And I think that you'd have very interesting splits in the wealthier tourist communities as well, where maybe a lot of those people have traditionally backed Republicans, but are the sort of voters who President Trump has struggled with. He's done substantially worse amongst voters with college degrees, notably, than Mitt Romney did, than John McCain did. And I do think some of those voters are the sorts of people who come, from suburban Connecticut, from suburban New Jersey, and vacation on this island. And I think that would be an interesting trend. I think that if those people could vote here, you'd probably see the island have been closer in the elections like 2008 and 2012, and now perhaps even less close.
Toby will give you a short last word.
Yeah, same deal. I think Trump would have more support. There are more, I would say, Republican summer residents, but as Parker said, there's also a lot of people. I knew hardcore Republicans that when Trump won in 2016, literally, I heard they didn't get out of bed for a week. So that's always a funny story, I think, and they were Republicans. So,
well, that is going to be the last word tonight. I'd like to thank Toby Brown and Parker Richards for being panelists on this show tonight. We appreciate your time and your efforts. I would also like to thank Dune Restaurant and Bar on Broad Street in Nantucket for being sponsors of this program. Thank you very much. I'd also like to thank Frank Schott, who is our producer, engineer, videographer, you name it, he's been doing it for the last few hours. Frank, thank you. And also I want to thank all our viewers out there. I appreciate you taking the time to tune into Channel 18. You're probably all champing at the bit to get back to the networks to see what's going on in Florida or whatever state you're keeping an eye on. But thank you all for tuning in. For Nantucket Community Television, I'm Charlie Walters. Have a good evening.